What makes a meaningful human connection for you? Is it shared interests or potentially commonalities in location or circumstance? Is it spirit? Is it more ethereal? I think as I age, it becomes more and more important to build bridges between human experiences. Hey there. Thanks for stopping by. I'd like to talk to you about human connections today. When you're younger, it's a pretty simple process. You like the same TV show or sports team, you're best friends. But as we progress in life, there's some nuance to it. There's some traumas that we build up. There's narratives that we construct. There's different life circumstances and responsibilities and just physical, barriers for making those same connections that we had all that opportunity to do when we were younger, right? Well, I was walking my 200-pound Newfie this morning, and I recognized that I witnessed this struggle on a daily basis. And I think I just might have found a path around the single biggest barrier that separates us from each other. So my dog's named Bubba. We brought him home and he was called Cosmo originally because he was really dark. He's a Newfoundland, one of those classic black Newfies with the white little tuxedo there, And we thought the name was pretty fun, so we decided to leave it that way when we brought him home, and we were kind of lovingly calling him Cosmo Kramer, to start with. But I'm a big spirit person, and to me, he just carried this kind of derpiness about him that just made me fall in love with him. And so I have nicknames for all the people that I care about in my life. It's just sort of part of how I relate, I think. And very quickly, Cosmo became Bubba in my eyes. I would caution you with, firstly, making a decision on a giant Newfoundland. There's a lot of things to consider financially and with the space that you have available to you. I don't think I would have gotten a house with hardwood for starters. But also just the responsibility that an animal like that brings into your life. He's really dependent on you, and certainly if he's inside. And so what that meant for me was I have daily walking routines that developed over the course of the last 6 or 7 years that we've had Bubba. There's a lot of circumstances where I just wouldn't want to be doing this, right? It's raining outside, so I have to grab an umbrella and I have to grab extra water resistant gear. And then if it's nighttime, I might have a flashlight or my phone, and then I'm just sort of finagling all of these pieces while I'm still wrangling this 200-pound beast. Or maybe it's the winter time and I just don't want to be outside at the crack of dawn when it's below freezing and I might slip on an ice puddle or something, right? Inevitably, though, I've begun to really enjoy this ritual that Bubba and I have during our walks, especially in the morning, because it gives me a nice opportunity to kind of reflect, and it's a quiet space to kind of organize my thoughts as the day begins. Well, on this one particular occasion, I was out on my normal route with Bubba in the morning, and we have a neighbor that lives sort of catty corner from us. And he loves Bubba. It's not the type of dog that you see very often. And we've sort of become mildly famous in our neighborhood just because of the sight of this dog. At this point, as I said, he's over 175 pounds and maybe 200. He won't even fit on the scale at this point. And he looks like a giant bear. And I can only imagine the two of us just kind of trundling down the street, how it must appear to, different segments of people. I've been here, as I said, about 6 years, and not everyone knows my name, but everyone knows Bubba. Well, this one neighbor in particular really has an affinity for Bubba. He's asking about him every time that I'm outside, especially if I don't happen to have him with me. He always gets Bubba to wag his tail when he, hollers at him. He can't quite remember his name is Bubba. This neighbor calls him Cosmo. He's going to be Cosmo forever. I think that just got cemented on his brain, when we brought him home and did that first walk down the street. But one thing I've also noticed is Bubba's kind of a conduit, right? In this one particular interaction, I probably wouldn't talk to this neighbor very much, in and of itself. He's a bit of an older gentleman and we kind of have different interests, to put it mildly. But we have a shared understanding through Bubba. And another thing about Bubba is that when he gets out of the house, he's on a mission, right? He needs to mark his territory. He needs to kind of go to all the places where he marked his territory previously. He needs to scan the horizons for any potential threats, any other dogs, and certainly people. Bubba loves people. Ever since he was small, I've never seen a dog that didn't want to play with toys, and we got him all these toys. We wanted to really kind of pamper him because he was our first dog. I'd been with my wife for over a decade at that point, and we never had an animal. And I know that that always kind of was something that my wife wanted to have happen for us. So we were getting him all kinds of stuff, but Newfies are kind of like people first. And certainly Bubba was. If you're moving rooms in the house, he's going to follow you, right? He's going to, if you've split, right? If the groups of people have split, he's going to find the most advantageous spot to be in the center of all of them. So you can have a connective tissue to each group to make sure everyone's okay and that he's as near as he possibly can be to the whole of the family. Well, since he was a little puppy, Bubba has just been overcome with joy at the sight of people, certainly new people or people he's familiar with but doesn't get to see very often. But what Bubba doesn't realize is that it's an increasingly intimidating sight for someone who's not familiar with him or doesn't come around very often to experience all of the joy that he has to offer. He wouldn't hurt a flea purposely, but he's going to jump all over you, and he's just like a slime machine. He's going to, give you all kinds of affection, things you want and things you probably don't want. And it's maybe that times 100 when we're out on the street, right? If someone stops their car to admire the dog, he's going to be all up in the window if they roll it down. And if neighbors are out on their lawns, he's going to expect them to want to acknowledge him and come on over, right? Well, I always had this sense that my neighbor wanted to approach Bubba. He was always giving me treats, during the holiday times. And whenever we'd get a card from this neighbor, it would include the nuclear family and Bubba. There's consideration for Bubba, right? So this morning, over 6 years into our, relationship, my neighbor decides today's the day. I'm going to approach Bubba. So I'm walking past his house and he kind of charges out the door, right? And he's waving and he's got a treat in his hand. He's waving with one hand, he's got the treat in the other. It's his intentions are obvious. So I steel my resolve. A lot of people want to come and see Bubba, right? But they don't often recognize the amount of work it takes for me to kind of contain Bubba's enthusiasm. And I feel like Bubba's got this 6-year relationship in the back of his mind whenever he sees my neighbor approaching him across the street. So my neighbor gets to the middle of the street, and he's walking up. He's going to take the bull by the horns. He's going to give Bubba a treat and he's going to give him a little pat on the head probably, right? And Bubba does this really funny thing where he kind of lays down when he knows someone's coming to visit him. He's trying to bait these people, right? He's really docile. I'm not going to hurt a flea. I'm really small. He just gets really into his own, space, and he tries to minimize the danger factor that he might be projecting. But inevitably, as someone gets within his reach, he is up and ready to give them a big old Bubba hug. And sure enough, my neighbor gets about halfway across the road and Bubba is off to the races. I can only imagine what it looks like to have a 200-pound bear just barreling across the street at you, right? And my neighbor knows Bubba at this point, but still there's there's what you expect and what you hope and then what you see in front of you. And can you match what you know with what you see in front of you in the moment? It's fight or flight kind of. So my neighbor makes that split decision in the moment and decides today's actually not the day. And he throws the treat and says, I'll try again next time, and books it back into his house. Luckily, no cars were passing by or anything. So I wander up to the middle of the road and I grab the treat and I'm, giving it to Bubba. I'm like, your neighbor brought you a treat, buddy. And Bubba doesn't care. He didn't even eat the treat. Even after we got inside and I tried to give it to him later, he didn't care about the treat. He really just wanted to meet this person that he was desperate for attention for, And so we get back into the house after the circuit is complete. And I just remind Bubba every time in these circumstances that, Bubba, you're your own worst enemy here, bud. The love that you want would just come to you if you'd allow it. And I've been thinking about that all day today. The love that you are seeking would just come to you if you would only allow it. About a year ago, I started a YouTube channel because in a moment of quiet, I felt something speak to me that this was something that I should be doing, The thing is, I had been wanting to start a YouTube channel for the last 15 years. And so in this moment, when I make this resolution to begin about a year ago, I charge out of the gate with my hair on fire. At this point, AI is really becoming a big thing, right? And I decide it's a productivity multiplier. So I'm going to learn everything I can about growing an audience and building a brand and scripting and editing and titles and thumbnails. And I'm just workshopping all the time. I'm working on YouTube in my subconscious, and I'm working on YouTube in any spare moment that I have in my physical reality. So I do something like 80 videos in the span of like 6 weeks or something. I'm really going for it. And another horrible habit that I develop in this space of time is that I download this YouTube Studio app, right? And what it lets you do is it lets you track all your stats, right? So you upload a video and then you can just refresh all the time to see if you got any more views or any more likes or subscribers. The gold would be the subscribers, right? And I had these visions about the metrics that I wanted to hit for my channel by the end of the year. And that's just the type of person I am, right? I go for it. I set milestones and I, carve out plans to, work my way towards those milestones, and I track them along the way. And I just dream really big, right? So I was dreaming really big with this YouTube thing last year. And I think I started to burn out, honestly, by the end of the year. By video like 90 or so, I think I was just exhausting myself with all of the concern that I was putting into the presentations that I was giving, right? I recognize on the other side of that, basically I had to stop for a little bit. I took a breather, and I ended up starting this channel on the other side of that breather. Something in me subconsciously, I think, recognized that I wasn't doing it for the right reasons. I had great intentions, but I lost those intentions along the way while I was trying to desperately attract attention. I was trying to package myself as perfectly as I could. I was trying to, I got a prompter so that I could read my scripts and I could just really scrutinize all of the points I was making. I could focus on the gaps and spaces I was taking between the points. I could focus on my performance, right? And I'm a musician and a performer in nature, so I really felt like I was leaning into some strengths with this. But I was just more and more disappointed with the lack of response I was getting, the lack of growth, just the flatness that the videos would roll out to. And that's what brings me back to this human connection piece that I started with. My dog wants nothing more than to connect with humans, right? When he sees a human, he is all about it, and he will stop at nothing. He will remove every physical barrier that's in his way, and he will drag me along with him if necessary. But when we're in our house, just, amongst each other, he is the most atmospheric and calm and reasonable and loyal and communal thing that I've ever experienced. And it's hard not to walk by him and just want to give him a little bit of attention every time, right? And just remind him that he's loved and that he's such a special thing. And it's just for him being who he is. But when he's on the street, he is trying to sell himself to everyone who will have him. And I know what he wants because I was doing the same thing. And don't we all do that very thing in our lives when we want something so desperately? We try to, build up the right resume. We try to leave the right first impression. We try to dress the right way. We try to present ourselves in a way that we feel like would ingratiate ourselves to others, But I do know from experience that the most meaningful connections that I find are those where I am not marketing to the other party. They're those where I can actually feel like I can just exhale in the room, right? Where I can be myself. Do you find it difficult to be your most honest and authentic self in front of other people? If so, I'd love you to leave me a comment below and tell me why you think that is. I'd love to read about your story and then maybe help you unpack that. And one thing that I've recognized at this point in life is that I have a young son, and I don't know how long I'll have on the planet. And I really want to find a through line to relate to my son throughout the years. However long I have, I want him to know who I am. And so I need to be who I am in order for that to be the case. And so as I remind myself of this lesson that I remind my dog of on an almost daily basis, I want to remind you of the same lesson, that the love that you are seeking will come to you if you only allow it. And isn't that another thing that bonds us as humans, the stories that we have and that we can share? And that's kind of what I do here. I tell stories about the stories that we tell ourselves. So if you'd like to hear more stories about the stories that we tell ourselves, check out this next one, and I hope to see you there. And thanks for watching.